Good afternoon. This is Nicole Music, and I have the honor of being a part of the traditional native medicine program internship, and I have been blessed in that opportunity as we speak. Um, this has been a life-changing role for me in taking this and learning more about traditional customs and traditional plants and keystone species and how to manage the land with tribal people customs in mind. Uh, in this slide, this picture was taken July 12, 2025. It is the Chehalis River at an all-time low. If you look closely in the background on that little piece of land next to the river, you will see a few deer down there drinking water. This river is at an all-time low, and aquatic species have been struggling to get water and to thrive in a drought situation. Many times we don't even think about how does a drought affect nature, and how do the animals and the plants and things that we take for granted, how do they thrive, and how do they become a working ecosystem that we can use for generations to come as a people, as a whole. And we have been blessed in many ways in the fact that in the 21st century we have water and we have land and we have land rights and we have things that provide for our families and our children and our grandchildren. However, that is slowly slipping away. Many times we take these things for granted overall. I mean, for instance, when you are living in the city and you're in an apartment, you don't think that the trash that you're throwing away is actually going to be detrimental in the future as to what kind of species actually live and what kind of plants and animals and people are able to work in harmony with each other. And in the city, where trees and nature are very limited, it's a concrete jungle, so to speak, it is very difficult to have it present in your life. And so it's very important to educate and be able to understand that interconnectedness with nature and how we all have a part to play. So learning all the things that I did in all those videos and being able to answer the questions honestly has been pretty life-changing in our own family. The traditional native medicine reciprocity in my garden has been the first place that I've been able to apply what I've learned. Some things to understand in our area of the world. Oakville is a very, very tiny town. It is a gas station, a restaurant, and a school. And that's pretty much it. Everything is closed down. They have buildings that are boarded up. There are buildings that are falling apart. And every year when it floods, the whole entire town of Oakville floods too. So this is a very interesting environment that we live in. We actually live about 5 miles outside of the city limits of Oakville, and we don't have many neighbors. We have maybe 3, and then we're surrounded by pasture on every side. And the pasture is not as healthy as it could be. It is, well, right now it is dead grass, and I'm kind of concerned because any spark and the whole entire pasture could go. The pasture on all sides are probably about 4 feet to 5 feet tall, and everyone is waiting to harvest their hay. So it's been a interesting environment. Uh, I much prefer living out in the country where it's very rural, and I can walk on my property, and I can see the plants, and I can touch the plants, and I can sing to the plants if I want to. It's been fun teaching my daughter how to go into the garden barefoot and just feel the dirt underneath your toes and be able to commune with nature in that aspect. So every aspect of the videos that I watched in this program has been life-changing. For instance, I actually spoke to my niece. Well, it's my husband's niece, but she just had her second child, and when we went to the salmon ceremony, I sat there with her, and I said, "What is your take on breastfeeding?" I have 5 children, and every single one of my children I breastfed. That was my go-to. I had no other options in my life that I wanted to do because I knew inherently that breastfeeding was the best path for me. And so this is really important for us to understand that when we understand the importance of just simple things like breastfeeding our children, and for how long do we breastfeed our children, I never contemplated how uh, tribal Native people struggled with this. It's been very interesting, and listening to Alex Falk, who is our niece, it was interesting on her take as to the tribal aspect of it and understanding where we are in that scheme of things. So I was very enlightened in that, and that conversation was very, very educational too. I didn't realize, you know, it's not that I don't love my niece, but I didn't realize that she actually struggled with breastfeeding. And being able to have those conversations with our own family members is very key to being able to promote that education and be able to promote that way of life. So my journey on Native medicine kind of started happenstance. I was I was a school bus driver for 7 years, and at the end of my 7 years, I was laid off like every year. And because I had to go on unemployment, the unemployment specialist said, "Why don't you go to school and be retrained?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I didn't know I could." And so for 2 years, I was retrained in accounting. And because it had been probably 18 years since I'd been in any kind of an office, I went to the Chehalis Tribe Accounting Government uh, uh, office, and I asked the CFO if it would be possible for me to just come in and get a sense of how the office works. I said, "I don't want to be paid. I just want to be paid in experience." And that was in 2016. Well, 2015 to 2016, I worked 4 days a week, auditing accounts payable files at first, and then slowly it evolved into me shadowing their bookkeeper or accounting clerk. And then in 2016, in June of 2016, I proceeded to be asked if I would be willing, right before I graduated college if I would be willing to come in and be a temp in their office and take up some of those duties to the bookkeeping because she had to take a medical leave of absence. And I was like, sure. It was not something that everybody, thinks to do, but I was like, okay, yeah. And that was in June. And in October, the person who I was temping for, she actually had to retire due to medical complications. And as a result, they put the position up for, you know, to announce the job that was available, and I applied. Because it is a tribal environment, and because that is their first, you know, go-to as far as employment, I really was not expecting to be hired because I knew that there were other tribal members that were also applying for the same position. But I had already been doing the position for 6 months. I didn't have to be retrained. I already knew what I was supposed to do. And my spouse and my daughter were both tribal members. So I did get the position. And 3 years later, I then got promoted to accounts payable specialist. And I am now taking up some of the duties of the coordinator, the accounts payable coordinator, only because she is on our the Chehalis Tribes business committee, and so she has gone a lot to deal with a lot of the tribal business aspect for the whole entire tribe. And so there are some aspects that I have had to take on to keep accounts payable going. Anyway, in 2016, when I got hired, it was like January of 2017. Charlene Abrahamson and Katie Klein and Elise Crone came together, and they presented a Native medicine class. And the class was so inspirational. It was amazing. I was able to go and learn how to identify plants. I was able to learn what these plants meant in the way of how do we use them for our own benefit, and how do we harvest them ethically without disturbing the environment and disturbing the actual plant itself. And so from that moment on, I took every single class that they presented. So from 2017 until 2000, well, it's been 9 years, so I would say about 6 years later, so 2021-ish, I've taken just about every possible native medicine class, herbal medicine class, and have been inspired to get my own apothecary, have been inspired to get my own library of herbalism and native medicine books that I reference constantly on how to help not only my animals, but also my children and my husband and my nephews and nieces. I go to church every Sunday. I even have people at church who come to me and ask, hey, this is going on. Do you have something that I could do to kind of help with the symptoms? And I will tell them I'm not an apothecary clinician, but I have had experience in these herbs and they could work, but you need to check with your doctor. And so there's a lot of things that I am like really hesitant to share because I just don't want somebody to get hurt inadvertently by my ignorance or naivete, if you will, on sharing those herbs with others. And so I'm really cautious in that aspect. I will very much so have them check with their doctor, make sure that it's not going to mix with any other meds. We usually use teas or herbal infusions We don't use tinctures as much because my husband is a recovering alcoholic, and we have alcoholism and drug addiction all the way through our families on both sides. And so tinctures are usually based in an alcohol, and because of that, we can't really use them. But I'm learning that you can use other ways of making tinctures so that those herbs can be utilized in that aspect. So it's been very educational in that aspect. So I digress just a little bit. In 2021, Melanie Stevens came on board to take over the SAMHSA Native Connections grant program. And what she did is she then created an apothecary that was hands down by none amazing. She had herbs from every possible Pacific Northwest area that could help elders and children and youth and families, and she would have these classes, and then we would make lots and lots of these trauma bombs and healing bombs and teas and soaps and things of that nature. And so we would make all of these things together, but we would make a surplus of those things so that she had it on hand for when somebody did need it. And so that has been very helpful. And as you can see, I'm not going to read it, but as you can see, she did make a quote. Her goal with the Chehalis tribe is to create an apothecary that anyone from the tribe or the tribal community can come in, and instead of going to Western medicine where drugs are generally prescribed, but maybe taking a more holistic homeopathic take on it, and go to an apothecary where you can get an herbal infusion tea, or you can get a tincture, or you can get a trauma bomb, or you can get a healing bomb, so that you don't always have to use Western medicine to heal everything. So this is a continuation of the reciprocity in my garden, and um, one of the things that I learned with that cultural keystone species was, how can I use that to boost those species in my own environment? How can I use it to create that ecological interconnectedness in nature alone, while working in harmony with nature and our garden? And by garden, I mean we have approximately 1.13 acres, and those that acreage is nothing but dead grass right now. And I don't like having dead grass, and I don't want to get livestock animals that I can't take care of. So we are working really hard on trying to create a Washington state native species environment that can be built up and utilized so that the flooding that we have in our pasture is almost non-existent, that the flooding that just overall around the area is reduced considerably. I My house itself is not in the flood zone, but everything behind my garden, well, behind my house, is literally all the way to the creek is flood zone area and wetland area. And so it's very protected. So by planting these native species in this area, especially water aquatic loving plants such as river birch and willow trees and maple trees and alder and western red cedar, which by the way is not really a cedar tree, which I didn't know that until recently when I actually looked it up. The the thing that I found very interesting with all of these plants is that they do have an interconnectedness. It's almost like companion planting in the garden. So everything has a place in nature. Everything works together in that interconnectedness. And so for us, having those sword ferns and having the trees and having the mulch underneath of wood chips and being able to have that biodegrade on its own and be able to not disturb it unless necessary. Not that we couldn't go out and, run, a fork or a rake through something, but in a way that we could actually understand uh, the ways of building up a pasture in such a way that we don't even have to worry about that land piece to it, that we're able to just go out and enjoy that nature that we have built. And so we have a 5-year plan. We just moved in this last October onto this property, and we now own the property, so it is ours, with all the debt that goes with it and all the repairs that go with it too. So our 5-year project is it's very slow going. So this year we planted approximately 25 fruit trees. There were approximately 10 fruit trees already planted in the very front of the house. And it rains a lot in the fall and winter generally, but this year it did not. And so I found where I planted my fruit trees, it was very mushy and it wasn't draining like it was supposed to. And I was like, what in the heck? I did not see that there was standing water up there. And so now we have to look at, okay, are our trees going to survive? Number one. And number two, are we going to be able to utilize the fruit in 3 to 5 years? And so having those trees will not only create habitat for nature, such as birds and squirrels and, insects that can, live and thrive in an environment like that, but also to make sure that those trees are providing our family with a much needed sustenance, such as fruit. And we planted apples. We planted a Chehalis apple tree, which is indigenous. Well, it's not indigenous, but it is a Washington State species that has been grown here for decades. And we also planted many plum trees, and we planted many apricot trees, and we have a couple, not a lot, but a couple peach trees, because I've never had luck with peach. And I'm not really a fan of peaches, but my family likes peaches. So we planted some of those. And this area is mostly to sustain our family in the years to come, in fruit that we can not only preserve, freeze dry, we can also dehydrate, and we can use as gifts. We can give to other family in the area, and we can also give to other tribal members that we are friends with. So this was a win-win situation in our eyes. Even though they aren't keystone species, cultural keystone species, the hope is that it will provide food for generations to come. And so that was the whole goal to planting those 25 trees. Anyway, so I digress again. So we planted the 25 trees. That was the first stage in our 5-year project. The second stage was we had to rototill the whole entire garden. And if you don't understand how big our garden is, it's about 1/4 of an acre altogether, and it is huge. Our family does not need that big of an acre garden. It's just not manageable by any standards with both my husband and I working full time. So the goal was Yes, we had to rototill this year, but the goal is never to have to rototill again, and using permaculture and agroforestry techniques to um, provide a more natural, harmonious aspect to the garden that we are growing. And so this first year we rototilled and leveled everything out so that there were no like huge holes in the garden, because I don't know about you, but as we get older, our balance isn't all that great, and especially my mother's. Um, so I really hesitate to have older generations, elders, just midlife individuals walk out into the garden with those holes in there, because it could have been a disaster. You couldn't see where the holes were, number one, and number two, um, they could cause damage by people falling. And so that's why we ended up rototilling. And after the rototilling, I noticed that the soil was depleted of all minerals. It was so bad. And I knew that the soil where everything grows from needed to be amended. It had to be built back up. And that means that we need mulch, and we need decomposition, and we need plants, and we need a way to keep the moisture into the soil, and we need a way to keep those nutrients where they belong. And so we started small with our vegetable garden and our herbal garden, and we started with pots. Um, we came from a RV for the last 3 years, so our pots were filled with sunflowers, and they were filled with dahlias, and they were filled with lilies, and they were filled with uh, lemon balm, and they were filled with lemongrass, and they were filled with wood betony and peppermint and chamomile. And let me see, what else did I have out there? Oh, and lavender. Two different kinds of lavender, Munstead and true lavender, were planted. And then I was given grape and fig. And those will be planted when they're just a smidge bigger. They're just not quite big enough. And because they're such delicate plants when they're younger, my concern is if we plant them too early, they won't survive winters here. So we are kind of babying them in pots. So that is where we're at there. Um, so at the end of the 5 years, once we have done everything that we're supposed to, and we've planted everything that we're supposed to, which after this year, the goal is to let everything reseed. So tomatoes and pumpkins and squash and any kind of vegetable that has a seed can actually just decompose in the ground, and the following year will grow on its own. We do not have to grow it in a greenhouse. We do not have to grow it in the house. We don't have to use that electricity or anything of that nature to promote that growth. It will grow on its own as a volunteer. And so that is, even though it's an annual and it's not supposed to be a perennial, it can grow every year. So that was the goal at the beginning, is to be able to plant it once and not have to plant it again. And so that's where we're at here. And then once we're done after 5 years, the goal is to have enough abundance that we can actually share, not only with our family and our friends, but also with the tribal community. You know, they have food boxes that they hand out at the community center, and the goal is to be able to help supply some of that so that others can benefit from our produce. It's not something that we need to be paid for. It's just something that is important to do, because it is so important for tribal members and tribal communities, as well as Native people who aren't tribal members, to be able to access healthier, good food that are maybe a little more culturally keystone in that aspect of it. So in this slide, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that I already talked about the soil depletion in the previous slide. The soil is dry clay. It is crumbly. It's not very rich in nutrients, and the soil lacks biodiversity of any kind. I was noticing it's very pale. It's kind of clayey and crumbly, and there wasn't a lot of oomph to it. It's not like walking into the forest and seeing all that biodiverse soil underneath those trees with the dead leaves and the worms and the insects and the everything that is decomposed underneath the canopy of trees. That soil is rich in nutrients that is the trees are utilizing. And so having that rich soil in our garden will go a long ways to providing those beautiful vegetables in the long run. However, we also don't want to overdo it, and that can happen too. Um, for instance, don't plant shade plants in full sun. That doesn't work. And the other thing is don't plant full sun in the shade. So you have to know where the shade is coming from and where the sun is coming up and setting, so that you know that what you're planting in the location that you're planting it is the correct location. The other funny haha that we had was that when we bought our house, we've had nothing but problems with the water and the septic. And we just had the septic fixed. The previous owner came back and actually fixed it for free. And that was nice. But we've had constant problems with the water. Whether we get enough water or whether there's water to spare, we generally have to be very conservative for our watering the plants in our garden. So one of the things that we did was I did some research to find out how to get water to my plants without depleting the water in the tank to the house. And so that has been a journey. However, I found that Oyas, Olla, is an ancient Egyptian practice that was used centuries ago, thousands upon thousands of centuries ago, in reducing the amount of water you water your plants with, for one, and for two, for providing water and nutrients to your plants in the long run in a way that they are okay with. For instance, you're not going to overwater your tomatoes with an Oya pot. So that means that if you use an unfiltered clay pot, which is what they're generally made of, you put a stopper in the bottom, fill it with water, plant it between your plants, and I would say 2 to 3 inches all the way around your pot, and then plant that 2 to 3 inches there. And what's going to happen is the roots are going to gravitate toward that Oya pot, and it's going to grow around the Oya pot. And the water from the Oya pot is going to seep into the ground and water your roots. And your plant foliage will not get as much water, but your roots will. And all the nutrients will be going into the roots of your plants. And I was like, well, I don't know if this will work because we're not in Egypt, but they did use it there. So I was like, okay, we'll try it. So we got a few pots and we planted them in the garden. And I got these, I don't know what they are. They're kind of like a foamy stopper, almost like cork, but not cork. And the stoppers were in the bottom of the clay pots and I buried them up to the rim, and then I used the little plate that usually comes with your pots, and I turned that upside down over the top of the water. Now that does two things. It provides the ability for insects and bees and animals to stay out of your pot. But number two is that it reduces the amount of evaporation that you would normally have if it was open to the air. And so I was like, okay, I will try this. And so we tried it, and we planted about 10 tomato plants, not big tomato plants, little tiny seedling tomato plants. And that was about a month ago. And now my little seedlings are now probably 3 feet high, and they're producing tomatoes. And in some of the pictures that you'll see throughout this presentation, you'll see those tomatoes on the vine. They're still green, but they're growing. And I was completely shocked. My plants are completely green. Everything else looks dead, but the tomato plants are green and lush, and they're thriving, which I was completely shocked at. So the next step was we planted Oya pots all the way around the garden. So I have Oya pots between roses. I have 4 roses, and they're 2 together in different areas, and both of them have Oya pots in between. And the roses were, well, we had that frost when we weren't supposed to have frost, and so my poor roses that I planted, they got shocked pretty good, and so the leaves all turned brown and they were gross looking, and I was like, well, okay. So we planted the Oya pots in between the roses, and all of a sudden all of the leaves, the dead leaves came off, but new luscious green leaves started growing, and I didn't have to water anything for a week at a time. So I would go out there once a week, drown my plants like there's no tomorrow, and then walk away. And even when the temperatures are in the 90s, we still have lush foliage on our plants because we are not putting anything that would burn the leaves on the leaves. So that was great. So the Oya pots solved the problem of the lack of water in the garden. So as you can see in this picture, this is an Oya pot. I took the lid off so you could see that I'd filled this probably 3 to 4 days before, and it is still almost full. I mean, it's down from where it was, but it is almost full. And my roses that are planted on each side of this Oya pot are lush and green and wonderful. You can also see around here, this is not the soil. This is the mulch that I put on the roses after we planted them, and planted the mulch, or placed the mulch around the pot as well. And then after this picture, I put the lid back on to prevent any evaporation from happening. But if you look real closely at the bottom of that pot, you can see the stopper in the hole. And that was really instrumental in helping the water to stay in the pot where it needs to be, and to be able to let the water seep into the soil where it needs to be. So that was very helpful. This Oya system was very good as far as reducing the amount of water we needed to use. In the past, I've had gardens, and I've had to sometimes 2 hours at a time water the garden. And it helps to have that much water, but the problem is you also have waste from evaporation. You have waste from, it runs down where it's not supposed to. There's nothing down there. And so the plants that really truly need the water don't necessarily get what they need. And so this was a way to have a focused, concentrated water source for all the plants in the garden in such a way that it didn't cost that much either. It was like $2 for that pot and $2 for the lid. So $4, and I had everything that I needed to create a water source for my plants. Eventually, we plan on installing what they call a gray water filtration system. And what that means is that we will have a pipe, a plastic PVC pipe that goes underneath the house from the washing machine, from the showers, from the sinks. Generally, the sinks in the bathroom, the sinks are the showers, and the washing machine. And what that will do is it'll come out of the house, from underneath the house. It'll come out, and then we'll have a filtering system that will allow all of the toxins and the soaps and the detergents and everything be filtered out of the water so that the clean water can be used eventually to water the garden itself. But that's a few years down the road, not right now. But I found that way we're not wasting water. Because to be honest, in this day and age, I took water for granted. But now that the temperatures are rising, the carbon dioxide is rising, more and more trees are being cut down, and it's taking longer and longer for the planted trees in their stead to grow back. And so I never realized how important just simple water was until I moved here, where water was very scarce. So this is our process of using these techniques in our garden to help with that. And then we have to start thinking about plants that thrive even if there isn't water. So that, for instance, hydrangea, they need a pretty wet, moist soil to thrive. And because of the lack of that, hydrangeas have been left in their stead because not a lot of people can provide that. That means you have to water it. And if you live on a city water, that's a lot of water you have to pay for that you shouldn't have to. So being able to find plants that you can plant and reduce the amount of water needed and provide water necessary in the house is pretty important for our family. So we already talked about how we planted 25 trees for our um, 5-year project, and planting the cultural keystone species that will create a biodiverse environment in our garden. Now that I've taken that assignment and learned from that video, I'm like, okay, what are the cultural keystone species in our area? I don't want to plant something that isn't necessarily uh, indigenous. But at the same time, we also need to plant things that sustain us. And so, what are our personal cultural keystone species that we need to be able to thrive as a family? So, my mom is 82 years old, and she gets these ideas in her head that she needs to do something in her yard. My mom struggles with back, hip, and knee pain, a lot of it. She was a school bus driver for 45 plus years, and the damage that the school bus did to her body is astronomical. Anyway, She now has a pump that has electrodes in there that sits on her hip in her back so that she can not have to feel the pain in her back, because that's how bad it was. So the reason I'm telling you this is because to the right, that little spindly little tree there that you see is the result of my mom's harebrained idea. My mom has the perfect environment in next to her house. It has understory, it has trees, it has ferns, it has rich nutrient soil, and she got this harebrained idea that she needed to remove all the volunteers that had grown because she said they were too close to the house. They were 20 feet away, but they were too close to the house. Meanwhile, she has a plum and an apple tree that are sitting against her house, but we didn't want to move those. So that's why, a lot of the things that she says don't always make sense. They make sense to her. They don't make sense to the rest of us. And but I love my mother, and so because I am the oldest of two, when my mom needs help around the house, she calls me because I'm the closest one, and I generally will drop everything to go help her because I don't want her getting hurt. She's very much older, and she's lived a hard life with that school bus driving, and I want her to be okay. And her husband is not able to help. He's also older, and he struggles with cancer. He was just diagnosed with cancer again for the third time. And so he's not really able to help her either. So it is our family, my daughter, my husband, and I, that generally go and help my mom when she needs help. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. It just kind of depends on what the project is. Anyway, so this little spindly volunteer, my mother had this harebrained idea to have me pull it out, but we couldn't pull it out of the ground because even though it's that small, it had grown through the spoke hole of a wheel hub. And I was like, I cannot get underneath the wheel. I can't move the wheel. I can't do anything in that area because it had grown through the tire. And so we snipped it almost at the ground, and the root is still there in the ground, so it'll grow. But I got the top of it, and instead of just chipping it or just tossing it on the mulch pile, my mom stuck it in root powder and said, "Here, take this home and plant it." I was like, okay. Well, I did plant it, but I was noticing on the spindly stick that I have there that there were thorns on it. So she said it was a plum tree, and I dispute that because I don't think it's a plum tree. There are like 2.5, 3-inch long spokes of thorns that come out of this tree. And so I'm curious to see what this tree actually is. It'll probably take a bit so that I can see what the leaves are, and then I have an actual app that will identify it for me. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. I just have to do my due diligence and research it. So that's where this is. Now below the picture, you can see the hose at the bottom there, but you can also see the cardboard. So during fireworks season, my husband works in a fireworks stand with his best friend, and I do not work in fireworks stands. I work all day long in accounting, and I don't have time for that. So I allow him, well, I don't allow him, but I have been a part of this since we've been together for 20 years, and I don't have a problem with him working in the fireworks stand. I just don't do it myself. Anyway, so because fireworks stands routinely have cardboard, I got all the cardboard from the fireworks stand and I used it in the garden because we have to amend the soil, right? So as you can see, this little cardboard there, this is a pathway that I created with the cardboard. And every time I went through and pulled thistles out, because thistles hurt when I go through the garden, I pull thistles and I pull other weeds that are not beneficial to the ground or the garden or are an invasive species, I will throw on the cardboard and let it decompose. And that decomposition will eventually, with the cardboard, will eventually build that soil up so that we have more nutrients in the soil and the soil isn't like crumbly clay. So that's what that is. And then our plan, our 5-year project plan is to plant Washington State specific native species of wildflowers to create a sanctuary of insects to start with until permanent plants could be planted. Of course, I love flowers. Who doesn't? And so when I go out into the garden, I want to see flowers and I want to enjoy the flowers. I want to be able to smell them and I want to be able to pick them and put them in a vase if I want to, or just deadhead the flowers so that they thrive better and that they grow more. And one of my favorite flowers are sunflowers. I love sunflowers. I don't really eat a lot of sunflower seeds, believe it or not, but I do love sunflowers. I think they bring me joy, and when something brings you joy, that should be planted a lot so that it brings you more joy and you're able to decompress after a long day. The other things that we are doing is planting grapes. I make a mean grape jelly, and my family loves grape jelly on their toast. So we planted some grapes, and then we planted strawberries, blueberries, and elderberries. Now we have a problem because we have moles. And the moles, although they aerate the soil, which is great in some areas, they also attack the roots of some of your prevalent and prominent plants in the garden. So I was frustrated, and moles are really hard to get rid of. My realtor said to use a cherry scented, I wouldn't eat it, urinal cake, break it up and put it in the holes, and they just go away. They don't get killed, they don't do anything, they just go away. I struggle with that because I don't know what is in a urinal cake, and I don't want that toxin to be in the soil. So I have to do a little bit more research before I do that. But there are other options. You can put milk jugs filled with water in each hole to prevent them from coming up. There's that option, but they just end up making more holes, so it's a really tedious project. Not to say that they don't, if they were in the pasture, I would have no problems with it. But they're in my garden attacking my blueberries, then I have a problem because I want blueberries. And blueberries are an indigenous species, so I would like to keep my blueberries and eventually plant more, but I don't dare plant more when we have this issue. So this is a picture of my garden, and I went out in March or April, and I had a couple packages of wildflowers for the Pacific Northwest coast, and I took a handful and tossed it and just planted it. It was after it was rototilled, and my daughter came out and she goes, "Mom, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm seeding the garden with wildflowers." And she goes, "Okay, don't you need to put them in holes?" I said, "No, Wildflowers can grow on top of the soil. That's how they grow. That's how they reseed themselves. And she goes, oh, she did not know that. So this one little tiny sunflower is from the wildflowers that I planted. And the little white flowers next to it, that's actually a Shasta daisy that I planted in memory of my best friend who recently passed. We were best friends for 41 years. And so I planted flowers, which she loved flowers, in my garden in memory of her. Eventually, I will get a dahlia that's called Rebecca's World. It's a red and white dahlia, but that will eventually be planted in a memory garden specifically for her. So that was my funny story about how I planted wildflowers in my garden. It's beautiful now. I have baby's breath and gypsophilia. I have lobelia. I have calendula. I have a few other flower plants that are in there, and they're all planted. So I planted dahlias and peonies in the garden, bulbs, and then I tossed all these wildflowers over the top of it. And so they're all thriving together now, and it's looking beautiful. So eventually I will post the picture of everything blooming at the same time. So planting the trees and getting some of the vegetables into the garden this year, that was phase 1 of our 5-year project. Phase 2 to 3 is being able to use small organic wood mulch for the soil amendment, and that means every time I plant something, I put mulch over the top to help retain the moisture that's in the soil, as well as help with the soil amendment and nutrients. Because we're starting out fresh and don't have a lot of income to spend toward this, we have to do it in stages. We want to also purchase at local nurseries that are specific to Washington State native species. And what does that mean, native species? Well, native species means that we are going to be using plants that were here, that somebody has taken, like the seeds of a plant, and has grown it in a nursery in a way that we can actually then go out and plant. For instance, there is a Pacific honeysuckle, or not a Pacific honeysuckle, I apologize, that's the wrong flower. A Pacific columbine that is indigenous to Washington State. However, because columbines are so easily genetically altered, it is really important that you can't have any columbines on your property other than that one specific species. So that may or may not be an issue, because I have right before the sunflower there are 2 actual columbines, different colors, and they just reseed themselves every year. So that will be interesting to see how that pans out. The other thing that we're going to be planting is we want to plant crab apples. I did some research, and crab apples are indigenous to Washington State, and they are great for the environment. They're also great for eating, believe it or not. Even though the apples are a lot smaller, and it takes more to create whatever it is that you're going to create, they actually are really beneficial medicinally for you as well. So we plan on planting some of those, and we're going to plant some Oregon grapes. I had wild cucumber in my garden. I was like, does wild cucumber actually have cucumbers? I don't know. But we actually had wild cucumber. We also have wild comfrey growing. I saw this at the beginning of the season, spring season. I saw this big, huge plant, and I do mean huge. And I was like, what is this plant? It almost looked like borage, but when I checked it and actually identified it, it was actually comfrey. And the comfrey plant is huge. Like, it's probably almost as tall as I am, and I'm 5'4", and it's probably about 3 to 4 feet wide. It is a huge clump of plants. And so we plan on not disturbing the comfrey, but maybe fencing it off a little bit so that we can protect it a little bit. I just don't want somebody to come along and mow it down, because it's kind of on the cusp of the garden and the pasture. And if somebody's going to go into the pasture and mow it down, I just really don't want them to mow down my comfrey, because that is a really good beneficial plant medicinally as well as naturally. We also want to plant, well, I already planted black raspberries, but we'll plan on planting more raspberries. But I prefer to put raspberries in bigger pots, just because I don't want them to spread and have me walk into the garden and get tripped up by a vine of raspberries or a vine of blackberries. They can be very invasive at times if the conditions are correct. The other thing that we plan on doing is planting western hemlock. Western hemlock is actually a water-loving plant, and I can plant it closer to the creek side, and it will help absorb some of that water that floods in the pasture. And so that's kind of where our thinking is. So the pasture is actually almost like, have you ever seen the China terrace steps of rice paddies? That's kind of what the pasture is. So the roadside is the lowest point, and then backside is the highest point of the pasture. And what happens is the creek comes up and goes around our barn and over across the pasture and down into like almost a ravine type situation. And this last year, the dogs loved it because they could go swimming. But this is flood water, and we don't really want them in the flood water because all kinds of things can come up, toxic things. And so we had a lake in our pasture, a complete lake, and it was almost to the road and almost to the back pasture, which is like over 97 acres. So our little tiny strip of land was like nothing but water in the middle. Between the barn and our house, the bottom of the pasture was just nothing but water. And so we want to kind of reduce that so that we don't have all the toxic things that come up with the flooding. And so that's where our goal is. We are working on building, in the second year, we're working on building a chicken coop, but just not any chicken coop. So I'm a firm believer that happy animals are more productive and happy animals are healthier. So what we want to do is build a chicken coop that has all of the herbs and plants and canopies and understory plants that provide not only food, but insects and shade and an environment that chickens will thrive in, and a small path that will go through the coop itself. My daughter's like, well, I don't know about that, Mom. But by working harmoniously with nature and the chickens who naturally forage for their foods, seeds and plants and fruit and vegetables and things of that nature, then we will have healthier animals that provide us sustenance in the long run. And so this is really beneficial to us to do this. So planting thyme and oregano and sage and even apple trees inside the chicken coop run is really important, because that planting will provide food and sustenance for the chickens. And I can go out and harvest herbs if I need to. The only thing is, with chickens, you have to make um, allowances for their foraging. So say you have thyme or oregano or sage planted within the chicken coop, you need to put like a wire mesh cover, like a cloche, what they call a cloche. So it's a rounded wire uh, thing that goes over your plant. The plant can still grow through, and anything outside of the cloche, the chickens can actually forage for. But inside where the roots are, they can't disturb the root system so that the plant can thrive. So they're just harvesting and giving the plant a haircut, essentially. But that system of being able to work harmoniously together with nature and the chickens will provide healthier eggs and healthier chickens when we have to harvest them. It will be an amazing environment for my daughter to have fun with, and she loves chickens. That's the most thing that she's been begging for. But we have to wait until next year, in the second year of our project, so that we have enough supplies to build the actual coop that we want, and then start putting plants in there so that they have that environment for themselves. So the 5-year project continued, year 4 and 5. So our goal is to create a small pond, but not just any kind of pond. So in the previous slide, we talked about how there's flooding in the pasture between the barn and the house. And what we are talking with professionals in how to create a small pond that we can generate a current so that the water is constantly flowing, so that we don't have stagnation. And by doing this, we can create an environment where the flooding would be reduced necessarily, and we would be able to put aquatic plants in there that would be water loving, so that we can create a biodiverse ecosystem that would be able to be used to build the land up. And so that is in our 4 and 5 years projects. We want to be able to plant those indigenous aquatic plants around the pond, but also create that current, so a waterfall that cycles up through a filter into the waterfall again, so it's constantly moving over and over, so that we don't have stagnation where mosquitoes can create the Nile virus, or the West Nile virus. And so those are kind of things that we've been talking about doing in the year 4 and 5. But it's going to take sitting down with a professional and understanding, like, for instance, with a wetland specialist or a land management specialist or a botanist, to understand how to place a pond in there in a way that doesn't impact the land per se, but also creates that biodiverse ecosystem that we are looking for, that can be just placed in there and build up the property and be able to give us value in that aspect. We also want to plant many water-loving trees, like river birch and cottonwood and white willow and alder and maple along the back side of the property next to the creek. This does two things. Number one, the creek has water, which has nutrients, which means that eventually the trees will be able to tap into that water source, and we won't have to water them. Number two, by planting them, the root system actually stabilizes the land from erosion. And so that is really impactful in the fact that because we have a creek and because it is constantly pushing through with that current, we want to make sure that we're not losing land along the creek bed, that we're actually being able to sustain that creek bed as it is right now. And so that's really important. Cottonwoods have been known to create their own tiny islands. In San Antonio, Texas, you can see along the Riverwalk a grove, if you will, of cottonwoods that cottonwood trees that would the root system would be so complex and so interconnected that it would actually be an island unto itself with no dirt, no soil. It's just root system in the water. And I thought that was so amazing and interesting in how these trees had adapted to their environment in such a way that they loved the water, so much so that their root system had grown together to create that island. And you can walk on the island. It doesn't float or anything. I mean, it takes up the whole area. But it was just very interesting how that system worked. And so we have natural cottonwoods here. They're an indigenous species to Washington State. So the goal is to plant cottonwoods that are water loving, no matter where you get them. All cottonwoods love water. And be able to plant them in such a way that we can have cottonwood buds for centuries, to be able to use in our trauma balms and our teas and our using the resin from those buds to be able to use them to heal our wounds and our pain and our arthritis, things of that we are so important. Both my mother and I, and eventually possibly even my daughter, will have osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is the most painful thing I've ever had to deal with. And it can be regulated through diet. I'm not allowed to, well, let me rephrase that. I should not eat the following foods: tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants. I should not eat eggs. I should not eat wheat. I should not eat dairy. I should not, or casein from the dairy, which is in all dairy. I should not eat bananas. I should not eat man-made sugar of any kind. And I should not eat beef of any kind. So what does that leave me? That leaves me chicken. That leaves me pork, which pork is fatty, and I should not be having that either. So it just limits the amount of food that I can have that is healthy. So the goal is to be able to regulate through diet. However, that doesn't mean I can't have it. It just means that I will pay the price later. So if I eat those foods in abundance, I will be in pain for the next 3 days. That means that my joints will hurt, like painful when I get up to walk, painful when I sit down, painful when I lay down, painful when I just walk to the door. It is an inherent pain that I cannot get rid of and end up taking pain medicine to overcome that pain. And so to be able to have a healthy life, I limit the amount of foods that I should not eat because of that aspect. But that doesn't mean I can't have it. It just means I knowingly know that I shouldn't have it. And if I choose to have it, then I pay the price later. So that being said, let's see here. Oh, so the cardboard and the decomposing weeds on the cardboard, that is the start of our mulched walkways in the garden. So once we establish these walkways will be permanent. They will not be moving. So eventually we'll get more mulch. They'll go over the top of the wood or the cardboard and the decomposing plants. And eventually those walkways will be thick and lush and be able to be used for generations to come. because those walkways will be naturally made. We will have to maintain them by weeding and things like that, but other than that, we're not doing that. Sorry, I am so sorry. I lost my train of thought here. We want to have those walkways established in such a way that people will not trip. People will have access to the garden and to the food that is in the garden that they could pick just going out there. So I told my daughter, because there's plants out there, there's tomatoes and there's things like that that's out there already. And I told my daughter, I said, I don't care if you go out and pick something off the vine. If you want to eat it, eat it. That's the healthy way to live. It's just go out, pick what you want. If it's blueberries, go pick some blueberries. If it's raspberries, go pick some raspberries. If it's an apple off the tree, go pick up the apple off the tree. The goal is when you go into the garden and you are hungry, to reach out and grab what you need. And that is the goal here. So yes, we have a garden. But no, it doesn't have to be just a garden. A garden is a plethora of plants harmoniously living together in an area in common. And so one of the things that we want to do in our garden is be able to create benches that people can go along the walkways and sit and commune with nature. The other thing that we are looking at doing is in part of the garden, we want to make a medicine wheel garden, which is planting trees for shade for some of those plants and planting fruit and vegetables and herbs within different quadrants based on earth, air, fire, and water, and spirit. And so the center of the medicine wheel is a pole that has been planted in the ground, and I don't like that idea, because to me, if it's going to be in the center, it needs to be a focal point. So I want something living, not a dead pole in the middle. So I want a tree. A tree, it means many things. A tree has roots that we come from. So the roots are where we start at, and then we grow. And as we grow, we branch out. So our families represent the tree. So we start with mom and dad, who are the roots, and then they come together and they create a life together. That's the trunk, that's the foundation. And then they branch out and have children. And in those branches, every branch also branches out because they're having their own children. And so this tree will become the focal point in the medicine wheel in our garden, because we want to focus on unity and family and where we come from and who we are now. And so every time somebody comes to the medicine wheel garden, they'll have a chance to pick up a rock, and we have paint pens, and they'll be able to write a word or two on the rock and leave it at the tree. And eventually there will be a pile of rocks at the base of the tree, but that will be inspirational for those that come and visit after them. So every time somebody goes out to the tree, they bring a rock and lay it at the base. And that is the nature of the medicine wheel garden. They have different plants based on different quadrants of the medicine wheel. And that is where we're looking at growing just this one area, and then surrounding it with other trees or bushes that can kind of, if for no other reason, create a secret garden within a garden. And so it'll be fun to see how that all pans out. Creating a meditational space, we talked about the pond. The goal here is to create maybe a platform, if you will, where people can go and do yoga or meditate with nature. It doesn't have to be a big platform. It doesn't have to be a big area. It just needs to be a place that is quiet and peaceful and tranquil, that we can go and commune and be able to have these things in our homes. And so this here is our final project, and we really want to provide this for our friends and family and any tribal community members that want to see our garden. This will be helpful for us in the long run. So the dream in our garden was to create a self-sustaining garden in conjunction with personal knowledge. The books shown here were helpful in learning self-sustaining techniques. So the medicine wheel garden I talked about in the previous slide was very instrumental in teaching me how each quadrant of the medicine wheel has specific plants that inspire, uplift, and create a peaceful, tranquil environment. That was staying truer to a indigenous people's customs and traditions through ceremonies, stories, and food and toys that we find in the garden. And so this book in particular was very helpful in helping me get the understanding that I needed to create this environment in our garden. The next book on the other side, you will see it's called Creating Sanctuary. Now, what does that mean? Creating sanctuary. Well, creating a sanctuary means that you can go anywhere in the garden and be able to feel at peace and tranquil, and be able to understand that you are in a safe place. I find that communing with nature is my safe place. It helps me ground myself so that I can move on, reduce the amount of stress I have, and reduce my blood pressure by a lot, and create that happy, peaceful moment in my life. So when I say that we want to create that sanctuary, that all the projects that we have done up to this point in every slide is based on that feeling, is creating that sanctuary in the garden, on the property, that anywhere we go, we will feel that spirit, if you will, of peace, and be able to touch the trees and be able to touch the plants and be able to, reach down and put your hands in the soil or run through the garden barefoot. Those are the kinds of sanctuary activities that we are looking for here. We want to create that biodiverse environment in the garden where everything has a place and everything works together to boost each other. So, for instance, I'm just using companion plants as an example. Tomatoes have what they call a tomato beetle, and the tomato beetle will attack your plants and they'll destroy them and you won't have anything left. So in order to combat that, you can plant bunching onions or just plain onions and basil. So you plant onions on one side and basil on the other, and the basil and the onions repel the tomato beetle so that you don't have detrimental predatory bugs, insects attacking your plants. And so that is what I am talking about here, is creating that biodiverse environment where everything works interconnectedly. One side of the garden might have sunflowers, the other side might have tomatoes, but everything in between works together to boost their growing potential. The other thing that we are looking at here is, once all the plants are established, we no longer need to plant. That has been a self-sustaining garden. So in other words, whatever we plant needs to be able to be reseeded or reseed itself in such a way that we don't have to plant again. So less time wasted on planting motions and more time enjoying the garden. And that's the goal here. In the end, the garden provides traditional medicine, food, tools, medicines, and toys, all of it. When we are done at the end of 5 years, that is the ultimate goal, is to be able to have that traditional medicine built into the garden. If I need yarrow, I can go out to the garden and I can pick yarrow. If I need mullein, I can go out to the garden and pick mullein. If I need marshmallow, I can go out to the garden and pick marshmallow. And the garden will provide the things that we need in our home and in our family, in our indigenous area, for our generation and the generation to come, so that when we are all said and done, the garden will be a thriving environment that works interconnectedly with our family. So what I learned in traditional medicine internship, I learned what traditional medicine is. It is the knowledge that Native people have learned over time from stories, songs, ceremonies, healers, watching animals, and observing nature. This means that generation upon generation has passed that knowledge down, and it just wasn't gained overnight. That indigenous knowledge has been inspired and taught and shared throughout generations and even centuries. And it's really important to understand what that is and how it is established. The land management, Native tribes and their communities, Native people managed the land in reciprocity. That's a really hard word for me. Allowing for mutual biodiverse environment, causing a thriving people to help the land to thrive as well. The ecological knowledge approach to quote, the ecological knowledge approach to the stewardship includes the Native people's culture as a critical component, by Lindsay Crowfoot, stated in her Land Management Assignment 8 video. The cultural practices as being lost. So due to modern day conveniences and necessities, many of these practices have been lost. For example, ancestral tribes would, when a mother had a baby, she would be kept in her home alone, well, not necessarily alone, but with her baby next to her, and family would come in, but they wouldn't take the baby from mom or dad. They would come in to help clean, and they would help take care of the family while they were in this cocoon of love and peace once the child is born. And so because of modern day necessities of people having to work and go needing that income, it's been very difficult for some families to be able to have that cultural aspect to communing with their children or bringing their children into them and creating that connectedness for family. It's been very hard, and in some cases non-existent. For instance, when you are breastfeeding, you need to be able to understand that mom's breastfeeding. Mom's going to breastfeed for as long as she can, or the child decides otherwise. In my case, I breastfed all 5 of my children. The first 3 were for 5 months only because I had to go to work. I could not breastfeed longer than that. And unfortunately, I was not able to pump breast milk. For whatever reason, I tried every which way under the sun. It just was not happening. So at 5 months, I had to give them a bottle or a tippy cup, and after that, we were done. My 4th child, I nursed or breastfed for 7.5 months. And then my last child, who happens to be the tribal member, my last child, I nursed and breastfed for 16.5 months. And the reason I was able to nurse her for as long as I did is because of the type of job that I had. I was a school bus driver. So I would get up and I would breastfeed my child. I would go to work at 6 o'clock. And then at 9 o'clock when I got home, I would breastfeed her again. And then I had to go back to work at 1 in the afternoon. And I lived within 3 miles of work, so it wasn't hard for me to go back and forth. And then I would breastfeed her again when I got home at 5. And so this routine that I had was the only reason I was able to breastfeed her for as long as I did. A lot of mothers don't have that opportunity, and so it becomes quite difficult for them to be able to use breast milk in nurturing their child. And formula is so expensive. It is just, even when I was breastfeeding my child back in 90, 91, 97, 2001, and 2012, formula has just gotten more expensive over time. And so understanding that cost and that loss of cultural necessity for bonding with our children and our families is very sad. And so having the resources to be able to provide help for our tribal, indigenous, native people is really important to support our mothers as they nurse their babies for as long as possible. And so that is really important in my mindset. However, that being said, my sister, we came from the same parents. My sister was unable to nurse either one of her children, and I could have probably provided milk for 4 kids. So it just kind of depends on the person, and I never berated my sister for that. I knew that she struggled. It's really hard if you do not have enough milk. And so sometimes, just for whatever reason, you just don't provide it. And so we should be understanding and gentle with each other when those situations happen. We want the best for our tribal members and our tribal communities. We want them to thrive, and we want them to incorporate traditional practices so that they stay true to their culture. And that is so important, and that alone is being lost. The Chehalis tribe, or the people of the sands, was established because there were a bunch of people harvesting and foraging within the same area. They weren't all from the same tribe. They were different tribes. They were Quinault, they were Salish, they were, Nisqually. They were very vastly different people, but they would go to the same ancestral lands and they would harvest and forage foods for their families. When the reservation was established, all those individuals, no matter who they belonged to as far as the tribe goes, were told that's their reservation and that's where they get to stay. And they didn't get to go back. to wherever it is that they were from. And so that is really sad. So a lot of the culture that has been created within the Chehalis tribe is a mishmash of all those different tribes together, coming together as one. And so now it's been very difficult to try and establish, for instance, language. The last living Upper Chehalis speaker passed away in the 80s. Where's the language? There's nothing to show us where this language is coming from. Marla Conwell, Marla Conwell and Mary Dupuy, twins, have been instrumental in getting a language program started within the tribal Head Start program. And so there are flashcards with different words on it. There are, every month they have a set of Chehalis words that they teach to the children. My own daughter, who's now 12, also went to this program, and the flashcards came out when she graduated Head Start. However, because she had just graduated, I was able to get some flashcards, which was great. And so we go through the flashcards and we talk in the language that my husband has lost. One of the things I do is here in the home, I will ask her if she's using her quailons, which is ears. And I, try to establish that language within the home because that is so important. However, because the language has been lost, a lot has been lost in the form of naturally speaking and understanding how to say the words correctly. So that has been also lost. And it's been very difficult for me, being non-tribal and a non-native, to come in and say, okay, I really would like to teach my daughter, who is a tribal member, how do I go about doing that? Because there are really no resources for me to do that. And I have been blessed working with the Chehalis tribe. I've been blessed with elders who have taught me certain things that I've been able to share with my daughter. My mother-in-law, for example, Evelyn Penn, was able to teach me quite a bit. She would insist that I go to her weaving classes, and I've made every weaving project that I made with her, I have given away. Not because I didn't want it, but because I felt that it was best with a tribal member that could benefit from the culture of that weaving. So for instance, I wove my husband a ball cap. That's what he wanted. And so with her help, I wove him a ball cap. And then I wove a, I did another weaving too. Oh, a basket. I did a little basket. And I gave that to a friend. And then she had me go to a walking stick class where we created these walking sticks. And I encased the walking stick in leather and stained the stick, and I added feathers, and I did some other things, and I gave that away too. But unfortunately, that walking stick was used in anger and had to be burned. It is what it is. So these things that are culturally occurring in our tribes and in our own very own families are really important to be able to take the knowledge that we've learned and apply it and use it and not just let it fall by the wayside. It's really important to have those things happen. Anyway, the lack of support is number one on that list, and I think we should create support groups within tribal reservation boundaries that would help those that are struggling and help those that are needing that support. Even if it means creating a breastfeeding support group within tribal communities so that all mothers who are nursing, breastfeeding, are able to attend, and they all learn the culture of being close to their babies and their children. So my final thought, I'm going to talk about the pictures first. This is my daughter Estrella on the right. Her godmother jokingly allowed her to read a box of macaroni and cheese directions, and she struggles with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, and she's autistic and ADHD, so lots of obstacles to overcome. And so she did not follow the directions, and she created a gloppy mess. It was almost coagulated, and it was super gross, I guess. I didn't see it, but my godmother told, or her godmother told me about it. And I laughed. I said, well, you learned something. And she was so upset. I said, we all make mistakes. We all can learn from the mistakes that we made. So in this picture, which we just did yesterday, this picture is her reading the directions on a box of macaroni and cheese and making macaroni and cheese. And she did it almost all by herself. We did it step by step so that she could understand the process of making this. Now, just so we are clear, we do not usually eat boxed macaroni and cheese, but her godmother does. So we did it this way. I've always taught her how to make macaroni and cheese from scratch, which is great, but her godmother doesn't do it that way. So this is her in the kitchen cooking. And then to the left is my husband and I. We are communing at the Westport, Washington Beach as a family, and he had set up an umbrella above us because, unlike him, I burn. I become a lobster at the beach. And so we are like grounding after fireworks season, after everything that we've been through this last spring. We went to the beach just to breathe in the air and touch the sand and touch the water and be able to ground ourselves. And as a historical, my husband's mother, that's where she went to be with nature, and she instilled that in her children. And so we've been doing it for the last 20 years, going to the beach together as a family and just enjoying each other. And there were no phones and there were no electronics. It was just sitting in our chairs in the sun or the shade and enjoying the peace that it brought. So that's this picture. And he was so tired that he literally passed out in his chair while we were at the beach that day. So that was pretty fun. So although we live in modern world, we can work hard to understand the customs, traditions, ceremonies, songs, and stories of our ancestors, whether we are tribal or non-tribal. Let's see here. Sorry, try to read that. We will find the truth to working in nature and building a biodiverse environment that includes all people. And I think that's really true in the fact that if we are going against nature, for instance, like trawlers grading the bottom of the ocean floor, that disturbs the ocean floor. That kills off all those species in that area. And it's so badly done that you can see it from space. So the goal is not to disturb it so much that you are killing off species, but to emulate that practice and not the trawling practice, but the working with nature, that you are able to become that thriving community, working interconnectedly together. Listening, truly listening to our elders, no matter their age, can provide guidance to understanding the path we must follow. This will lead to greater knowledge of land management, human interconnectedness, and a biodiverse environment that includes the Homo sapien at the, oh gosh, forefront. I'm sorry, I'm really having a hard time seeing it. Forefront, uh, instead of being lost to the modern world. Finally, incorporating cultural keystone species into our daily, into our, hold on. Just for whatever reason, I'm really having a hard time seeing that. Hold on. Well, that was no better. Oh, I know what it is. Incorporating cultural keystone species into our diets will allow for our tribal families and communities to be healthier and eliminate diseases like cancer, diabetes, kidney failure, hypertension, and potentially um, guide us away from generational trauma and addiction. And what that means is that um, by communing with nature and getting back to our roots will allow us to understand the importance of our healthy bodies. Um, the adage, you are what you eat, is really true. If you are taking drugs and drinking alcohol, you become what you have just taken into your body. And that can be a very sad situation. So, my husband is a recovering alcoholic. My father was a violent alcoholic. My grandfather was also a violent alcoholic. And my grandmother on my mother's side, so my grandfather and my grandfather were on my dad's side, and then my grandmother was on my mom's side, and she died of alcohol poisoning. So she was also an alcoholic, and so my husband's father was an alcoholic. His grandmother and grandfather were on both sides were alcoholics, and so we come from a long line of alcoholics and drug addicts. My own sister is an alcoholic and drug addict, and my niece, that my sister's daughter, is also a drug addict. And so we have had a conversation with our daughter about that generational trauma of using and that experience of understanding how if we never do it, if we abstain, if we turn to nature and natural medicines and products, then we are less likely to turn to that generational trauma and turn to that addiction of whatever it is that we choose. Um, I never had that alcoholic or drug addict component in my life. However, that doesn't mean that I did not struggle with a type of addiction, and it just wasn't drugs or alcohol. And so um, it's really important to overcome the trauma that we have either faced or are facing, and be able to understand that nature in the natural environment can provide everything that we need if we but look and understand the interconnectedness between people and our environment. And so that, I find, is really truly what I have learned from this program, is that nature can provide everything that I need and my family needs if I but turn to nature and the interconnectedness of people and the environment. And what that means is, if I go into the forest and I know that there was a storm and the tree was fallen and it happens to be a cottonwood tree, I will go and look for cottonwood buds, or I'll go and look for willow branches that I can weave together to make a basket. And what that means is, I have now just created something that nature has provided, and in a natural way. Being ethically conscientious and foraging within reason. That means only taking what is absolutely necessary, not taking more, and not taking enough is also the same. So those things are really important to understand as well. Being able to utilize the things that I've learned in our diets has been quite interesting. I have conversations with my husband every time I watch a video, and we talk about the things that I've learned and how to incorporate it into our own family. And having healthier choices, having healthier diets, and having that understanding of what we should be doing culturally as well as traditionally. So that has been amazing in our in this program. So finally, Glenn Connolly, the Chehalis Tribe Department Natural Resource Director, 2025, sent me an email based on the upcoming projects that they have been working on with the Chehalis tribe, as well as nonprofits and other avenues, as far as working with other agencies to accomplish the same goal. And then Melanie Stevens, the SAMHSA coordinator with the SAMHSA Native Connections coordinator, bringing Native medicine to tribal people and communities, has been instrumental in guiding me and helping me understand certain aspects of the herbal or native herbal medicine. And so there have been times when I have read something and I don't quite understand it, and I've gone to her and I said, okay, this is my take on this particular information and this knowledge. What is your take on it, and how can I incorporate that into what I do? And so we have conversations and discussions, and so she has been very helpful in understanding some of those aspects tribally as well as culturally. The picture on the right was taken this morning, July 12th, 2025. This river is at an all-time low, and many aquatic species are struggling to survive without the help of much-needed water. And so, as you can see, the bushes at the very left of the picture, there is a gap between where the water is and where that bush line is. And let me tell you, that's how far down the water is. Generally speaking, the water is up at that line, the top line, and that's in the summertime. So we are down, and the water is not moving nearly as fast. It's almost stagnant. And there are a lot of species that are struggling, not only plants, but animals too. And so it's really important that we understand how global warming and our temperatures rising. And so in the 70s and 80s, when I grew up, we didn't have temperatures past 75 in the summer. That was a high for us. Usually it was between 65 and 70. But in the summertime, lately, it's been in the 90s to 120. And those are extreme hot days. Like, we're just not used to those temperatures here. And so it's really important to understand how our our part in nature has impacted temperatures in the last few decades. It's only been 30 years, and here we are in the 21st century, and we have a crisis of temperatures rising in Washington state. We should not have this high of temperature. It should be moderately temperate, as in 75, maybe to 80. That's it, but no higher. And so it's really important to understand our part in how that impacts the environment in our areas. I want to thank you for accepting me and teaching me and giving me the honor to be in this program. It has truly changed our lives. Thank you.